Hello chaps, welcome to John Robson Guitar Tuition once again. I do hope you're well. Today's video is just a little sort of explanation really about how I, as a young whippersnapper, managed to unlock this enigma that we call the neck of the guitar. And I guess things all really started with how we used to tune our guitars back in the olden days. Okay, this is what a late 1970s electronic guitar tuner looked like. And for a young lad like me, 11 years old in 1978, this would have been prohibitively expensive. The gadget that I would use to get my guitar in tune and keep it that way was one of these things, a pitch pipe. Essentially a little harmonica with the 6 notes of the guitar strings on, and if you were really lucky, one of them might actually be in tune. On my pitch pipe it was the first string note that was the one that you could accurately tune a string to, and then using this kind of diagram that was in my first ever guitar tutor book that came with my first ever guitar, you could sort of reverse engineer the tuning across the rest of the strings using this relative method. So simply by using this rather arcane method of getting a guitar in tune, I learned an important fact, and this was that between the note of E and the note of A on the guitar there are 5 steps represented as frets. And this was the beginning really of how I started to unlock the mystery of the neck of the guitar. So it wasn't long before I had a reasonably good understanding of where, a lot of the notes on the guitar cropped up. For instance, as I've already mentioned, this here I'd figured out was an A because it was the same as this open string. At least it would be if this guitar was in tune. But then this note is a D, this note is a G, this note is a B, this note is an E again, and by extension, if the 5th fret on this E string is an A note, then the 5th fret on this E string must be an A note. But I still didn't really have much of a clue about what was going on kind of the frets in between, as it were, until I saw a poster that was on the wall in the music room at school. I've hunted high and low for a copy of that poster online, can't find it, so I've tried to recreate it as best I can. Anyway, this is how that helped me figure out a little bit more about note location. This is something like the poster I'm talking about, essentially just a map, if you like, of the notes on a piano keyboard, where they are and what they're called. And it's while I was daydreaming in a tedious, boring music lesson one day about some dead classical git who I had no interest in at aged 11 that I was staring at this poster and I was struck with a massive realisation. And that was that on a keyboard, just like on a guitar, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps between the note of E and the note of A. And I now knew what these notes in between E and A, and for that matter between all of the other notes that I already knew, I now knew what they were called. It was the light bulb moment for my young self, and from that I began to figure out pretty much everything that I know today on the guitar. So that's how I began to understand where the notes were on the guitar. But as you're probably aware yourself, there's a massive difference between understanding something and just knowing it intuitively to the point where you don't have to think about it. So how did I bridge that gap? Well, it was all to do with breaking strings, really. I would come home from school on a Monday night, can't wait to get my fingers on the strings. By this time I've got an electric guitar, the gorgeous Woolworths Top 20, plugged into the mic socket on my Amstrad Hi-Fi, or Amstrad Music Centre as we called them in those days. And the Shadows were kind of having a bit of a resurgence in their career at the time. This is the sort of late 70s, early 80s, and this is, I'm playing the guitar and there's a guy in a spangly, glittery jacket on the telly, wearing glasses like me, who's playing the guitar, and you know, it's bound to influence me. So I kind of got into the old Hank Marvin stuff that way. And you take, for instance, one of his tunes, maybe I don't know, that, and let's say I got home from school and I bust my top E string. It's going to be, this is a Monday evening, it's going to be Saturday morning before I can catch the, I think it was the X9 bus down into Middlesbrough Town Centre to visit Hamilton's Music Emporium to get a replacement string. So I've got to play all week with 5 strings. So how do I play this phrase, this kind of thing here, because I don't have this string? Well, you know, I've already figured out that this is a note, a G note and an E note, and I already know that this top E string is tuned 5 frets higher than this B string, the second string. So common sense told me really that I could replace these notes, or these note locations, with these note locations. All I've got to do is play the same thing on this string, on the second string, but 5 frets higher. So that would give me something like that, but that would feel a bit cumbersome to play. So I would start again looking for where notes repeat themselves, based once again on this logic of knowing how the guitar is tuned. So knowing that notes on this string can be found on this string but 5 frets higher, knowing that notes on this string, the second string, can be found on the third string but 4 frets higher. And you can kind of work through it all, which is what I did, and I ended up with something like that. And then once I'd done that, it seemed like, well, let's see if I can find it anywhere else, you know. So pretty quickly I began to get an understanding of where phrases and where groups of notes, scales as we would call them now, I guess, but I didn't know I was learning scales at the time. It was just groups of notes that worked together. Like that kind of thing. I began to kind of get this vision, this mental picture of how things were structured on the fretboard. And already I can hear the naysayers going, oh yes, but that kind of stuff's irrelevant, it's feel that matters. And indeed, you're right. But if we can just compare the guitar or music with another branch of the arts, let's say literature, there you go. Having a solid understanding of punctuation, of spelling, grammar, is not going to make you into a fantastic poet or novelist. Of course it isn't. But neither is it going to stop you from being a fantastic poet or novelist. It's about the creativity that's in you, and basically having this knowledge of where things are on your instrument, having an understanding of, dare I say the T word, theory, having an understanding of that gives you much faster, I think, access to the sounds that you're hearing in your head. Well, I've been teaching the guitar now since 1991, so that's a fair old time, and I teach beginners right the way up to like advanced students. And the reason why most people come to me, unless they're a beginner and they're just wanting to get started, is because they've taught themselves, usually these days from internet tabs and so on, and they get to a point where suddenly there's a brick wall that they just can't get past. And usually, no, not usually, 100% of the time, that brick wall is there because they don't have the knowledge to be able to see the next step that they need to take in order to achieve their goals. So it's not like having this knowledge solves the problems, it simply stops the problems being problems in the first place. Anyway, I'll get down off my high horse now. Where did I go next with all of this? Well, the years had rolled by and I was now an adolescent and becoming interested in girls. And what was a surefire way of impressing girls? Well, if you played the guitar, it was kind of playing tunes that they knew, you know. And early 1980s, the guy who pretty much ruled the charts was this fella, Adam Ant. And one of his tunes was a track called Goody Two Shoes. And I figured out that I could play the riff from that song using some of the notes that I'd sort of located down this end of the neck. It went something like this, I believe. Like that, and you only needed to play those few seconds before you had a legion of admirers flocking around you. Hopefully. And then I began to notice that, well, obviously because of the knowledge that I'd built up of sort of note repetition, that you could play that lick a little bit lower down. Like that. And, you know, I started noticing that other tunes could be teased out of that little box of notes. Obviously that thing, or maybe that. Loads and loads of tunes. Another one that I kind of got into around about that time was you know, the old Free song, Wishing Well, and it was all on this box of notes here. And I was able to play bar chords by now, this kind of thing, you know, and I knew that you could move a chord shape up the neck, so it seemed a logical thing really to just be able to move a scale pattern up the neck. So I would kind of take this and move it up like this. And there's my phone. I'll just get that text message and I'll be right back. That was my grocery delivery just turning up. Yes, that's why guitar teachers go to Iceland. Anyway, then once I'd sort of got that box of notes, I didn't know it was called a scale, let alone a pentatonic scale. It was just a group of notes that seemed to work, and I could move it up and down the neck to fit into whatever key. I think I had that concept somewhere vaguely hanging around the darker corners of my mind, so whatever key you needed to play in. And then the old string breakage thing would kind of rear its head again, and I would have to find out how I could play, you know, let's say I was kind of playing that, I would maybe, let's say I'd broken the third string, so now I would have to kind of find these two notes but on this string, so it would then become, and you know, that seems a long way up the neck to go just for those two notes. So can I fetch those other lower notes up here so that they're closer, and you start getting obviously by then I'd got the third string back on the guitar. But the point is, what I'm doing is, because I'm being forced to do this, because I'm missing a string, I'm finding out where notes that I need but I can't play because I'm missing a string also occur elsewhere. And just by doing this, I'm figuring out scale patterns. Didn't know there were scale patterns, didn't know there were scales. It's just sort of problem solving for me, really, at the time. So, how do I recommend that you kind of short circuit all of these years of fumbling and frustration and dealing with broken strings? Well, what I usually tell my students now is any lick or any phrase or any riff or any arpeggio, anything that you learn it in as many different ways as you possibly can. Set yourself a target by like taking a lick that's on these two strings, the E and B strings, and say, okay, I'm going to find everywhere else I can play that lick that doesn't involve those two strings. Pretend that they're not there, and you will soon build up a knowledge of where stuff is on the neck. And as I say, that gives you the vocabulary of knowing how to realise the sounds that are going on in here, the music that's inside you, how to kind of get it out onto the neck of the guitar. It works. Well, it worked for me anyway, and it works for pretty much everybody I show this to. Right, that's it for today, folks. I do hope you've enjoyed this and found it useful. If you have, then please hit the subscribe button, and that way you'll get to see more videos of this ilk. If you live on Teesside in the northeast of England, then give me a shout for some tailored one-to-one guitar tuition. Your first lesson is free, by the way, as is your first lesson if you choose to have one by Skype, so you don't even have to be on Teesside for that. I'll also just take a moment now to give a plug for both the albums that I've got out at the moment, Handles for Forks and The Whiskey Made Me Do It. They are both full of bluesy, shreddy, melodic rock guitar playing, and you're going to love it, I promise you. So check them out. You can find the links to where you can hear the albums and download them in the description box below, and you'll find the details of how to get in touch for lessons at the end of this video, very shortly in fact. That's it for today, folks. See you next time. Bye for now.